We'll call to order the Village of Oxford Planning Commission on Tuesday, July 18th, 2023 at 7 p.m. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Justin Ballard.
Here.
Scott Flynn.
Here.
CJ Gosdor.
Here.
Maureen Helmuth.
Yes.
John Knoll.
Here.
Michelle McCollum. And Leslie Pilak is absent.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening, July 18th, 2023?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve tonight's agenda dated July 18, 2023 at 7 p.m.
Second by Mullen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Agenda approved. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from June 6th, 2023?
Motion to approve the minutes. Supported. What was the date?
No, June 6th.
Motion to approve the minutes on June 6th. Support.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes approved. Madam Secretary, any correspondence?
We have an email from a couple that lives on Hudson. We presented in the public hearing comments regarding the rezoning for 25 Denison. And we have a letter from our Commissioner McClellan.
Okay. We will address the letter from the Skylises during our public hearing and the correspondence from Commissioner McClellan during our Commissioner comments at the tail end of our agenda. Now, I'd like to move to our public hearing for the request to rezone from R1 to C1 Central Business Transition District located at 25 Denison. For the public hearing to ensure a smooth process, the public who chooses to speak can stand to the podium. If you wish, please state your name and address. Address your comments to me, and I'd ask the commissioners to wait until recognized before speaking for the individual. So with that being said, are there any...
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion we open a public hearing at 7:02.
Support.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. So we have a motion to open the public hearing. Anyone who chooses to do so, again, podium, please state your name and address. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes.
Right here, right?
A little more.
A little more, okay. It's been a while.
To the right. No. There, yeah, there you go.
Hey, perfect. You know what?
He knows I'm here.
Well, let's get in your spot. My name is Justin Wilcox. I am a resident at 55 West Burdick. I'm also the moderator at the Emmanuel Church. I just came to share the resident opinion and my church opinion. We're not in favor of the condo being suggested at the corner. I personally, a resident, like how the homes are all kind of old looking and historical. I think the condo will take away that charm. So as a resident and the Emmanuel Church, we are not in favor of the condo being built. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bill Dunn, 14 Denison. Just a couple questions. First of all, what is this zone right now and what are the permitted uses?
Mr. Dunn, this is a public hearing for us to hear your comments.
Oh, okay.
And Once the public hearing is done, we will review the assessment findings from Mario and the McKenna organization. I assume or anticipate that some of those questions to be answered at that time. But for now, comments only.
During this meeting?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So this is not the time?
Now's the time for us to hear your comments as it relates to the proposal. And after the public hearing, we will then engage in dialogue with the planner and the recommendation.
I'm in favor of some type of rezoning because it's, basically it's in the village. It's right in the commercial area. I live right across from it. I don't want to see a 3-story building, something humongous. I'd be curious of what the uses are now and what the planned uses are. Again, I'm for rezoning as long as it's done where you could go from commercial and have it kind of flow into the residential section, rather than just all of a sudden just have a 2 or 3-story building across the street.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
My name is John DeVaugh. I live at 37 Denison. I guess statement versus question. I am concerned about the rezoning to C1/transition. And I guess really the biggest reason being is C1 is very inclusive of many, many options, as is transition. When you go through your zoning, you will see and you've seen it many, many times, okay? I've looked at it just kind of briefly, but you will see C1, you'll see C1 transition. What is permitted, what is special use, when you go down that list of many, many, many uses, potential uses, much are similar, much are permitted, okay? You will see a couple exclusions where it would be required special use. But so when I think of, I guess I view C1 transition as C1 for the most part, in terms of the many, many similar different functions of it. I think that, and it's my bad, I didn't hear or see what the details of the proposed project is, okay? And I, in my mind, feel that that is a very, there's 2 parcels really, we're talking about 25, but 21 certainly would be part of that, I'm sure, as things evolve. And for a sizable development, it would have to be. It's a very sensitive area as you're transitioning from pure commercial to residential immediately. No buffer, no nothing. And I guess one question would be, is there other ways to address it, whatever the potential development would be, a PUD or a detailed, more or less, whatever the development scheme is. Can we see it in detail, very much detail? Can we make amendments to it? Can we adjust it? And my feeling is that the one card that you hold, which is very critical in terms of creating the zoning that creates buffers and so forth, is an R1 rating on that property right now. And as long as that holds at R1, it does allow the commissioners and it allows the village council to work with the potential developer in a very detailed way and a very committed way. Not just, okay, it's C1, basically. Once you get C1, you do whatever you want with it. It's very broad. Lot line to lot line, 3-story. So I guess if there was going to be changes in that zoning to accommodate a potential development, that it be done with a means that you have as much control over the detail of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert Doak. I'm actually the property owner at 25 25 Denison. And I know there's a few questions that have been brought up already. I think there's a 3-minute limit, but figured I would just come up as well and just say maybe just a few things about it. You know, one is, you know, there's obviously been great thought put into the zoning and the codes of what is what, and C1 transition, you know, is close to C1, but it's also close to residential. I view it as kind of like a buffer, in my opinion, the way I looked at things and read it. I would also add that, you know, one of the big reasons for the request to the rezoning is that the house on Hudson, I guess maybe no longer a house, but that was in a very similar situation. So there was 21 Denison, 25 Denison, and then I'm not sure what the address is over there on Hudson, but it's right next door to us, to the north. And back when Dave Weckl was able to get that rezoned to be C1 transition, it's been a number of years now. I don't know exactly how many, but that went from R1 to C1 transition, and there's it's since then it's been sold, but that was basically just trying to kind of follow along in the same footsteps as far as the rezoning goes, and again, trying to get into C1 transition. There's no plans for it, or no plan for it as of right now, but you know, C1 transition does have, I don't know all of the things that are allowed in there, but it's definitely a lot more than just R1 right now. And I think just my personal perspective owning the property, and especially where it's located in that C1 business core district, you know, it's not across the street, it's not anywhere else, but it's right on that same quadrant where the parking lot is and all that. That's the reason for the rezoning, and I think it just gives me personally more upside and future different options with it, whether we sell it as is, or if we rent it a different way, or if we can develop it into the future. It'll obviously have to be into either C1 transition if it's approved, or if there needs to be a different use, then either another rezoning or a PUD, or but I think there's options along the way. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure more questions will be answered by McKenna, and we'll yeah. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Terry's late, see ya.
I believe so.
If not, can it be?
It was run earlier. It went up.
There you go.
Thanks.
It was running one up. Mr. Chair, if there's no other public comment, I'd like to make a motion to close public comment at 7:16 according to clock.
I will second. All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay. With that, the public hearing has been closed. We'll now move on to the call to public. And we can have some open the call to public at this point. Similar to, okay. If there's any public comment not related or specific to the rezoning request, now's an opportunity to do so. If not, we'll move to our new business, which is that of the rezoning application at 25 Denison to rezone from R1 to the C1 Central Business Transition District. Mario, we'll look to you to walk us through your assessment.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Just for the public that might be watching, I'll just briefly summarize the existing conditions. So this is a request to rezone the property located at the corner of Hudson and Denison Street. Right on the corner, it's 25 Denison Street. The current zoning designation is R1 single family. They are requesting C1 transition. And the site is currently occupied by a 2-story single family residence with a detached garage.
Hey Mario,
Yes.
if I may interject, I see one of our commissioners has left for the sake of ensuring that all commissioners hear your assessment. I believe there's an opportunity to take a few-minute recess to allow Commissioner to return.
Yeah.
Commissioner, appreciate your patience for the recess. If you want to continue.
Absolutely, yeah, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
So just once again to introduce the site, and this is from a letter, my review letter that the planning commissioners have had the opportunity to review, so I'm just summarizing those comments. But basically, for the public, as for those who might not know, the site is currently occupied by a two-story single-family residence with a detached garage, and the lot has approximately 58 feet of frontage on Denison Street and 194 feet of frontage on Hudson Street. When we look at the rezoning, we first look at the existing land uses around the site, the current zoning of that property, and then the proposed future land use designation. The site itself is currently single-family. To the north is a professional office. To the south is the United Church of Christ, and east and west are single-family residents. All property adjacent to this current site is zoned R1, except for the property to the north, which is zoned C1 transition. One of the first things we look at when considering rezoning is consistency with the objectives of the master plan. While the 2011 master plan had one designation for the site of vehicular parking, in 2016 the village adopted the Near West Side redevelopment plan, which amended that future land use plan. And the intent was to make a more detailed assessment of these areas. So based on the proximity of the core to the central business district, redevelopment of the village property on Burdick as well, this village-owned property is intended to eventually at some point in the future be redeveloped for a higher intensity use, typically a residential multifamily use in the Near West plan. And then you have the high intensity of our central core right on Washington Street. So based on those, the proximity to those areas, the redevelopment plan envisioned this site being proposed for rezoning, the 25 Denison, having to be rezoned to either CO commercial office or C1 transition. The C1 commercial office no longer exists, so the C1 transition would be consistent with the village's future land use map in terms of designating, if it were to be rezoned, what should the site be rezoned to. The Near West redevelopment plan also had created small, what are called character change areas. They looked at the most appropriate preservation or redevelopment strategies identified for particular locations throughout the village. In this case, the Near West redevelopment plan envisions the homes in this area right at the east side and west side of Hudson, north of Burdick, north of Denison. Envisions those homes either remaining in place or being replaced by other appropriate residential or mixed-use designs, such as townhomes, small apartment buildings, and corner stores. A wider variety of uses should be permitted to take advantage of the foot traffic and allow the downtown to expand. That's text from the Near West redevelopment plan. So in the end, based on the future land use map and the proposed goals and objectives of the Near West development plan, a proposed rezoning to C1 transition would be consistent with the identified policies of the village's master plan. Other things we look at are compatibility of the site's physical environmental features in case the site might have existing natural features that would impair development or cause issues with, or cause a loss of significant natural features. However, the site is a completely developed urban lot. So the reuse of so whether the site is being reused and the existing structure is reused for a new use in the C1 district, or whether the entire new structure is constructed, the physical characteristics of the site, because it's a flat piece of land that does not have any existing natural features, it would be compatible with either opportunity, either reusing the existing structure or redeveloping the site for a new structure. Then we would look at several different other characteristics. For example, the utility service that's available to the site. It's, as far as we are aware of, there are not any difficulties with having any of the utilities service the site in an appropriate manner for the proposed for any uses within the C1 transition. However, if we wanted more detailed analysis of that, I would defer to DPW and to the village engineer if we wanted more information. We do look at the capacity of the street system, rather to make sure it's efficiently enough to accommodate the expected traffic. You know, Hudson and Dennison Street currently have an increased traffic volume due to the vehicles that visit downtown and circle around through downtown and access the adjacent parking lot. So the character of those streets is a little bit higher intensity than like a normal residential street. And then the other issue facing this site actually is, based on its size, whether the site has the ability, the site would have to accommodate a proposed new use and the associated parking for that use. So it has very little ability, size I should say, to accommodate more additional off-street parking. So any type of intense use put on the site would have to come up with some plan in a site plan review process later down the road to determine where the parking needs will be met. Now, of course, we have the adjacent, relatively adjacent, I mean, right there, village parking lot. However, taking a look at the zoning ordinance, the parking reduction in the CBD district, technically the site isn't located within that reduction district. So they would have to either accommodate parking for any new use on the site or come to an arrangement with allowing for adjacent parking within 300 feet. The zoning ordinance typically allows other uses, if there's public parking or some other parking arrangement, to have parking off-site, meeting that off-site parking requirement demand. But that's something that would get into the details once again during site plan review. Those are just some of the highlights, you know, from our review. The zoning ordinance does have several other issues that it talks about, but you know, a lot of those, you know, either aren't relevant to this type of rezoning or just are not an issue with regards to this change from R1 to C1. For example, one of the questions the zoning ordinance asks is if the issue proposed by the rezoning, could it not be resolved by revising the list of permitted uses in the current zoning district? Meaning, if the site wanted to be developed for a particular use, should we possibly look at changing the list of uses in the current zoning to accommodate them? You know, this is the R1 zoning currently. Any other additional uses that are allowed in the C1 transition, you know, really shouldn't be modified to be permitted in the R1, mainly because R1 is our single-family district. It's found throughout the village. If we change the R1 district to accommodate either town, you know, multi-story buildings or some kind of commercial uses within the R1, that's a drastic change in character. So that approach, trying to modify the R1 to accommodate new development, you know, isn't appropriate. Those are some of the exercises the ordinance goes through. So in the end, if the planning commission feels that the rezoning is consistent with the master plan and is appropriate for that site based on consistency with the standards in the zoning ordinance, we would recommend that the planning commission recommend approval to the village council based on findings of fact that could be demonstrated in the motion for this use. But with regard to this site, I think one of the reasons the master plan talks about and designates this as C1 transition is the idea that if the downtown were to be expanded, it makes sense to have it in close proximity, and this is one of those sites that could possibly accommodate a change in use to a C1 transition to allow for more housing and more retail opportunities in the village. And with that, I will take any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mario. Commission? Yeah.
It was brought up in the public comment about a development going in there. Is there any, does anybody know of any development that we're talking about tonight?
As far as I know, there's not any development being proposed specific. This is a standard rezoning request, so that means that should the rezoning occur, then the property owner would be allowed to either establish any of the permitted uses in the district or go through the special land use standards to achieve those other uses. But they would have to go through the process. So if there's any kind of construction that were to be considered, depending on the scope of work, they would either need to get at a minimum a building permit. It would be reviewed for the size, and for example, if they did an addition and they wanted to make it an office building, they could do that with a building permit, provided the floor area is minimum, meeting our standards for a minimum site plan review. If there's any kind of new structure, they have to go through site plan, but there is no proposed development at this time, so it would be something done in the future, and they would have to abide by all our review and approval processes.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
This is a two-part question. The first part is, can you give us a brief overview of what the R1 is in terms of existing today? And then the second question is, what the C1 transition, what types of developments could go in there?
Yes. So under the current R1 district, it is identified as single-family residential. They are permitted by right to have one single-family detached dwellings. Duplex dwellings are permitted by right in the R1, and actually multifamily dwellings are permitted within the R1. There also can be residential uses as described in our form-based code. The village's form-based code would allow for structures to be constructed that are in compliance with the design standards and the massing and the architectural attributes identified in our form-based code. This site is located, it's in the very edge of our form-based code district, so they would allow that opportunity. So I believe that's why in our land use table for the permitted uses, multifamily is envisioned as a permitted use in the R1 right now, based on compliance with the form-based code standards. And those are more a traditional Midwestern style of apartments that we are accommodating, such as zero lot line, fenestration, meaning the window, the door placement being very Midwestern in scale and style, not anything modern. Other uses permitted in the R1 district are things like a person can have a home occupation or start a home business. They can also, and that's mainly it. The other uses are because we have to comply with the state statute, we are required to permit or under special use have state licensed residential facilities, meaning daycare homes, child care homes, or adult care facilities of a certain size. When they're 6 or less, they're permitted by right in those districts. That's the R1. In the C1 transition, generally speaking, it's more allowed for commercial, retail, and office uses. And then also the form-based code uses, such as multifamily structures based on the size and scale of the building and the site itself. They would have to meet all the density requirements and all the architectural requirements within the form-based code. But under offices, any kind of a professional office, medical office, even a funeral home is permitted by right. Personal service establishments such as a hair salon, that sort of service. Newspaper offices, if anybody wanted to put newspaper office, it's listed. And then, excuse me, I just want to scroll up here. When it comes to commercial and retail uses in the C1 transition, retail sales establishments, restaurants, bed and breakfast, hotels, carry-out restaurants are permitted by right. Arcades.
Mr. Chair, may I?
So that's it.
You mentioned hotel in there, but it's in there, but the practicality of quote hotel with the parking limitations that we have on that corner, that might be a sparse stretch. Is that correct?
That's correct, because while all these uses are initially, they are permitted, they have to go through the review process, and there are certain standards they have to meet, and they would have to meet that. So for example, if it was a hotel, I would envision it more like a bed and breakfast situation rather than
I have one other question, Mr. Chair. You talked about this form-based code, and some of the residents tonight, as well as in dialogue that I've had, are concerned about what was brought up years ago was a multi-story residential complex going in there. If you took that corner and you made it all commercial, which we're talking about one piece of property, 25 Dennison, if you stretched and said the other one, the one towards 24 could go into C1. The question arises about a multi-story residential unit going in there. Under the constraints that you talked about tonight, the parking constraints and the fit of that type of a unit in there, is that feasible in your mind that that could come into play in the village?
the setbacks in the C1 transition are very minimal in terms of the fact that they only have to have a minimum of a 5-foot front yard setback. Then there's a 0 side yard and a 0 rear yard setback, provided they don't, depending on the number of windows or doors on those walls. So then in effect, the building envelope that a building can be located in is pretty generous. And because, once again, we're trying to maintain our village character and not be suburban and have these buildings. So, in combination with the height requirements, the maximum number of stories is 3 in the C1 core, or transition, excuse me, C1 transition. And the maximum height permitted could be 40 feet. However, based on construction standards and that sort of thing, it would be, that would, the proposal would be dependent on the type of scale, that whether the cost effectiveness of creating a building that high and the dollars per square foot would allow for that to be created. We do have some design requirements in our form-based code to minimize impact of those. For example, the top floor is required to be set back 15 feet from the street wall. So say the building is 5 feet from Dennison, the top floor would have to be 20 feet from Dennison, because the intent is then the light can come in, there's no loss of light on the street, on the streets, and it's more in character with the adjacent buildings. It allows for that transition from the downtown buildings into this kind of district and then transition to the single family. So that's the intent. But in the end, I hate to keep saying it, but it is come down to what is proposed and what could be done in the site plan review process. But yes, it could be, if combined with 21, there could be.
I wasn't, Mr. Chair, I wasn't trying to lead you. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue. I thought I'd bring it up, but tonight we're only looking, from my understanding, at changing the zoning for this property. No development is being discussed as far as our review tonight.
That's correct. This is just a rezoning. There would be multiple steps involved, and at this time, I don't believe anything is proposed.
That's what we are. Thank you. Mario, quick question. In the C1 transition, the max building height is 40 feet with, as you mentioned, what would theoretically be a 20-foot setback off the street. This is a corner property. I assume then it's 20 feet off of both streets in the corner?
I do believe so, yes.
Great. My next question is what is the current max building height in the C1 core district?
Yeah, within the C1 core, you actually can have 5 stories
Okay.
and go up to 64 feet.
Okay. Again, trying to, envision many what-ifs, right? As we know, there is no current proposal for land use today, but identifying and addressing some of the concerns that we heard here in that transition into the R1 district, the basis for my questions. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, a lot of the, maybe just a couple comments. A couple comments that I had is Mr. Mill did ask quite a few of the questions that I had as well, so I don't have to duplicate that. But seeing some of this, seeing like based on what I see here, the consistency with the master plan itself, it's consistent with the master plan, regardless if I'm for or against it, it's still consistent with what the master plan requests. And then the other thing is, I'm noticing is that it is consistent with the existing adjacent buildings, such as 20 20 Hudson Street, currently being commercial as well. So just wanted to, my comments related to that are the two consistencies based on what are being, what we have in front of us.
And Justin, further to that point, which I am aligned with, full alignment on those comments, the fact is that there is no proposed land use presented here. And should there be a change or a new land use going forward, there's a series of parameters, requirements, processes that must be followed with checks and balances. For a lack of better description, a bulldozer isn't going to come in tomorrow and start building a 40-foot condominium complex. There are those processes, checks and balances that must be followed in order to adhere to other bylaws, etc. That mitigating some of my concerns as well, sharing that for the commissioner's consideration.
I guess if I can go ahead and say, I'm trying to think of how to say it right. Like, so there's nothing proposed, but given sort of restrictions as far as parking and other things like that, even with no proposal, if you go through with the rezoning, aren't you putting like the proposed people like at a disadvantage already because there's not enough space for parking and, you know, like kind of.
I would,
Even though there's nothing proposed, so it could be just something that goes in and requires no parking, but if there is, then we're already kind of like putting this in a disadvantage when it comes to like site plan review and furniture and that kind of thing. I guess it's sort of, yeah, there's limitations already sort of built in, so does it make sense to say, okay, approve it, and then now it's like, you know, banging your head against the wall, because you're like, okay, now what can we do? Yeah.
If I may, one aspect of this that actually happens quite a bit, and its easiest example is the property right to the north, is it gives the property owner more opportunities for a variety of land uses in the existing structure. So if they wanted to make that it was hard to get residential, or maybe the residential wasn't working for them, they wanted to get dollars per square foot higher under an office. It could be made an office, so the structure stays. The parking requirements for a one-person office would be minimal and could fit on the site. And so that's the other thing, is it gives that, if they wanted to make it some type of small boutique area, again, it could be the same structure, but then it's just a different configuration. You know, retail configuration might push the idea of the parking, but that's something that the property owner would just have to deal with and do that extra work, well, not extra work, that required work, and do their due diligence at that point in time. So you're right, I mean, it might feel like it's constrained already, but that's where architects come in to like try and figure out, based on our requirements, what could they do on the site. And right now, it's only based on a 58-foot wide by 124 deep, because 21 Denison is still a single-family residential.
any further comments? With that, is the commission ready to move towards a motion in regards to the rezoning request for 25 Denison?
Do we get to ask questions?
Mr. Chair.
Do we get to ask questions or make comments?
There is another point at the end of our business review for public comment, general
Well, this
public
is after you
comment.
make a motion and do this?
We had our public hearing at the beginning of the meeting. That was the opportunity for the public to make comments, for us to consider. Then we closed the public hearing. We then moved into our agenda item to discuss with Mario and discuss the particular agenda item amongst the commission. Now we move to make a decision.
So we can only comment after you made your decision.
You had the opportunity to make comment at the beginning.
I had a lot more to say, but you couldn't.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to let everyone know, the planning commission is here tonight with a public hearing, and then they'll make a recommendation to village council. Village council makes the final decision, so it's not the end, and there's always other opportunities.
There's no do-overs.
Well, this is just a recommendation. The village council is of their own mind, but they do take, obviously, the planning commission's recommendation into high consideration.
Mr. Dunn, in discussing with the commission, I'd like to give you the opportunity to come up and ask your questions, given the circumstances of the public hearing and this agenda item, if you wish.
Thank you, I love you. Come on, Chief. Bill Dunn, 14 Dennison.
Thank
I'm
you.
not really up on all these zoning issues, even though I was a township supervisor. But it really scares me that the village is going to give up control of that area. Would it make sense to whoever wants to be the applicant to come up and do a PUD where you could have give and take, and you could go as far as whatever that new zoning would allow, or you could compromise where you have control, somewhat control. So I wish the village would not give up control, and then you have them, because it's a sensitive area, very sensitive, and just a suggestion.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dunn, if I may.
Yeah.
If you'd stay up, could you elaborate on this PUD that you just suggested?
No,
And the control?
the applicant, if I'm not mistaken, can come in and you negotiate with the village and the applicant on what they plan. And you can give and take, you can give them the rezoning during the PUD. You would have complete control of what goes into that delicate corner. I don't have a problem with the development going in there, beyond residential. I think it makes sense to have some sort of commercial there. But again, very sensitive. PUD sounds like the way you'd want to go with that area. Because that rezoning is not going to stand, the applicant's going to come and go, I got commercial on one side, commercial, and I'm right in the middle. What are you going to do, say no? But again, I wouldn't want to give up control. I think PUD would probably be the best way to do it. Whoever comes in there, and then again, you would not be giving up.
Please, John. Yep.
I think to Bill's point, and going back to the PUD, there's a long history in Oxford, okay? So to get detail on that, it's there. In fact, I believe, and you know better, I think it is in your zoning, the rules and the guidelines are in your zoning document, okay? The only reason I say it is because historically, it has been a wonderful device in getting the community, which may be affected by such development, and the developer together on the same page. Okay. Just a couple things. The Denison-Hudson traffic, that is an issue. That's an issue already. For an issue that I don't think you shared was, in addition to what you did share because of the activity downtown, is literally Denison is a cut through. Okay? I mean, if you're coming north on 24, you've seen it, you perhaps have done it, okay? To avoid the light, you turn left on Denison, okay? And you're gonna beat the car in front of you that's turning left by minutes, okay? Your light and the speed of such is really dramatic, okay? So I guess if I was a developer doing condos, I don't know, condos you mentioned, or somebody mentioned condos possibly. I don't know, we don't have really details of what's going in there. There is no.
There's no place, no plan.
To Bill's point, you're not doing just 25 Denison, you're doing 21 and 25. when you look at that parcel, that will be what your commercial development's going to be. That's the footprint. You bring up 20 Hudson, yes, it's a C1 transition. That was a very small lot. There wasn't too many options as to what they would do with that property. I mean, you know how big it is. It's a very small lot, had really no choice but to leave that out there, so it wasn't going to change. I guess it was mentioned about certain C1 options that you could do there, whether it's cost effective. Well, the minute you're going to transition it from R1 to C1, that was cost effective already because that property value just went up. Okay. 25 or 21 will be done the same, or 25 done, you will indeed do 21. Why wouldn't you? Okay. And again, I'm just saying, before you get to that point, use all the cards that you have. Okay, use all the tools that you have before you make a decision on a really critical piece of property that is seriously a transitional piece of property. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn, for your knowledge and vast years of experience. The cards got changed here for me in some of my thought process. We had discussed some things this afternoon, Mr. Medor, in regards to this property, and I'm not clear, and I have to ask this question. Can the PC board suggest that they go, the developer or the applicant consider the PUD instead of a zoning change today? Can we go ahead forth with that idea?
I would say no. What's in front of you is an application for rezoning. You should approve or deny based on the facts in front of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nolan, just further, the issue with the PUD is that typically you would want and request that there be a site plan attached to it. And then because you also eventually have a PUD agreement that goes into, for example, say they actually wanted to go higher, and they might want to go higher, but in compensation for that, they have high quality architecture. Like they'll use limestone around the base and everything, something like that. Those kind of negotiations happen during the PUD, and so it's really project specific with regards to PUD. A PUD can still be done in the future, and actually could be done in concert with other property if they acquire ownership of it. But our ordinance also does require unified control of all property before it can be considered as a PUD. So while right now the application is just for 25 and it's just for that lot, but a PUD could be done in the future if it meets our standards.
And part of the reason, I think Mario touched on it briefly, is typically the reason a developer will come ask for PUD is because the underlying zoning doesn't get them what they want. So they want to do something different or extra. They might have they want to do a mixed use development where you got some condos here, you've got retail there, you've got, similar to the one they had over on the east side of town. It doesn't meet the zoning, so therefore they have to come get special permissions on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different items. And because the whole thing makes sense, they're granted those permissions, and everyone signs and determines what those various things are. This is a request to say, I want to rezone it to what the future land use map and future master plan says, and are you going to grant me the permission to do so?
One quick, Mario, not to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to understand this. We're looking at one piece of property tonight, just a simple zoning change. If others from the outside grouped other properties together and came before the board, then they have to follow suit of what's in the master plan and which is in the ordinance, correct?
Correct. Everything would have to be, any proposed project would have to be in compliance and consistent with our master plan.
So that would give us some checks and balances of what goes on that piece of, those groups of property there if we were to come together as a whole.
Yes, that's correct. They would have to go through the site plan review, and if it's PUD, it'd be more elaborate and more higher standard with regards to all our checks and balances for any kind of proposed development in the future.
Okay. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I make a motion that we grant rezoning applicants for 25 Dennison. Ox,
You were recommended to the village council.
excuse me.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we recommend approval to the council for rezoning application of 25 Dennison, Oxford, Michigan, 48371, zoning from R1 single family to rezoning to C1, central business transition.
Second.
I second.
Roll call vote.
Gosnell,
Approved.
Ballard,
Yes.
Noel,
Yes.
McClellan,
No.
Helen,
Yes.
and Flynn.
Yes.
Frymark is yes.
Nick?
This will be on the agenda at the
August Village Council meeting. Yeah. Before we move on, I'd like to thank those that came up and made their comments and engaged in the dialogue and discussion. Very much appreciated. As we have a motion that has been carried, we will move to the next agenda item, which is the sign permit application at 113 North Washington Street for the Greater Michigan Oral Surgeons. Mario, I think we have a one-pager.
Mr. Chair, real quick, I just want to correct something on the agenda. On your agenda, it's listed as C1 core, and it is actually C1 transition.
Okay, in the definition of
On your
item B,
Yes,
item B, it specifies
Okay, so
zoning
it's,
C1 core.
Yes, it's C1 transition up there. That's the normal down there.
We'll make then a correction, C1 transition. Thank you, Joe. Mario?
Yes, for this site, the applicant is proposing one internally illuminated freestanding sign in front of the building at 113 North Washington. The sign will be 6 feet in height, 23.9 square feet in area, and these dimensions do meet our zoning ordinance standards. Initially, there was not information about the location specific to the relation to North Washington. The applicant has since submitted a plot plan, and on that plot plan, it does show the sign being at least 9 feet from the Washington Street right of way, which would be in compliance with our location standards of the zoning ordinance. So those standards are met as well. Originally, I had a question about that in my memo. So finally, when it comes down to looking at the illumination of the site, the sign, the sign itself will have white and light blue lettering on a predominantly dark blue field. In the design and the materials itself, when they're laid out and proposed, are definitely very, present a clean and simple design style with no additional framing or excessive detail. So it will be an attractive sign, I believe. And given the fact that the blue-black background field is the predominant area of the sign, light transmission should not be excessive. However, just to be sure that the sign does not create glare for drivers, I would recommend that the luminance levels are controlled automatically. So I recommend the planning commission grant approval of the proposed sign, contingent upon the sign being looked at, contingent upon the installation of a photometric sensor with an automatic dimmer control module. And we recommend that those light levels be not exceed 100 candela per square meter from dusk to dawn.
Mario, a couple questions. This seems relatively straightforward, but for peace of mind, if you will, the recommendation to have the luminance level automatically controlled, I believe is new context to these types of permits. Help me better understand why we're introducing automatically here in this case, and we haven't in past cases where we've approved based on the installation of the dimmer switch alone.
Yes. I had an opportunity to talk to more sign companies, and a lot of them, while some of them were a little apprehensive about sharing information, I had some pretty friendly ones. They were saying, they have experience with these things, and they say an automatic photometric cell will automatically adjust the light levels on these signs. And that's advantageous for our purpose of reducing glare, but it's also advantageous for the businesses themselves, because while, I guess maybe as I think about it, maybe adjust this dusk to dawn recommendation, because the sign contractors indicated that the automatic photometric cell will allow for things like when there's a storm. The skies get gray out, the light levels automatically get adjusted so they're not that bright. And then also, conversely, when it's very bright out, the sign gets to be illuminated to the right level so that it's visible. I know in this particular type of sign that's not really an issue, but and this is more normally with what they call the electronic message centers or LED signs, where those light levels are more important to be characterized. But based on my conversation with the sign contractors, it seems like it makes it easy too, because it's not something also that can't be, that's for lack of a better word, modified by the property owner. If it's automatic, then it's just based on the light levels outside, and at the appropriate time, the light levels switch, and then the other times it goes back up, so it's visible all the time.
And the max level of 100 candela per square meter, that is consistent with past recommendations, correct?
Correct. And that's something that, based on my own research, I've been asking some of the contractors, and they don't seem to have any issue with that when it comes at a night level. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I would just modify my recommendation and just say, we recommend the light luminance level not exceed 100 candela per meter square.
Period. Got it. Mr. Moore.
Mario, my understanding, and this is clarification, the owner of the sign with this type of automatic dimmer control module can adjust the high points and the low points of that to allow that to go on and not to be too bright if we don't meet our 100 candela, or if we have our ordinance officer, as we talked about, come and address the business and say that there has been some issues and complaints, they can turn that down. It's not a set, I'm looking for a word here, it's not set in stone of the high and the low of that, it can be adjusted.
It definitely can be adjusted. Based on my conversation with contractors, it actually does require the sign contractor, in these cases when it's automatic, to go out and field test it and come up with, and they can come and get tweaked. But by having it automatic, it doesn't, basically there's not a dial on the sign that can be automatically bumped up. Say, for example, after the enforcement officer leaves the site, or that situation. Not that anyone would, but just to avoid that temptation. So with the automatic levels, they can be adjusted accordingly. Like if we go through practice and we find that they should be bumped up a little or bumped down a little, that you just have to call out the contractor, and they say they're more than willing to come out and adjust them accordingly.
So upon installation or at professional service, the automatic control system will be preset at a certain candela level.
Right.
And then the sign will hold at that candela level so long as it's powered on.
Yes.
Shall Justin?
No.
DJ? You want to say something?
No.
Okay. Therefore, I'd like to proceed with a motion to approve the sign permit application at 113 North Washington Street, located in the C1 Transition District for the Greater Michigan Oral Surgeons, contingent upon the sign being located at least 3 feet from North Washington Street, as outlined in the setback diagram provided to the Planning Commission, as well as contingent upon the installation of a photometric sensor with an automatic dimmer control module with the luminance level not to exceed 100 candela per square meters.
I'll second.
Second by
A
Ballard.
comment, did we or did we not change the 3 feet because we have a 9-foot setback?
What I indicated is that it's contingent upon the sign being located at least 3 feet from North Washington Street, contingent or in alignment with the diagram as presented by the planning commission, which confirms a 9-foot setback.
Okay,
I added some language there.
thank you.
Roll call vote, Madam Secretary?
Eller,
Yes.
McClellan,
Yes.
Noel,
Yes,
Hellman,
Yes.
Gostor,
Yes.
Flynn,
Yes.
and Pilot is absent.
Okay, good. Well done. Old commission, or old business rather, we have this on the agenda to continue our discussion on the 2023 action plan. In the last meeting, we made a motion that was approved to take our 2022 year-end report, if you will, and present that to the village council. You know, that discussion then, we wanted to narrow our business priorities for this calendar year to potential amendments on the landscape standards and or the awning signage. Headed into this meeting, my initial thought was, let's just make sure that, let's talk, or allow me to make a few comments that this needs to be at the forefront. However, it may not be the opportune time to dig into those details. Maybe set the expectation for the next meeting to say, we will discuss landscape standards, as opposed to general discussion. Thoughts on that plan of attack from the commissioners?
Yeah, I mean, ideally we'd have everyone here. I know that's kind of tough to do, but I mean, I'd love to have our landscape expert present when we talk about landscaping.
Could not agree more. Okay. So we'll focus then on the landscape ordinance review in our next meeting, contingent upon Leslie P.
Laura's team.
Yes. All right, fair enough. Do we need a motion to close?
I think Michelle has something to say.
No, we're going to wait there to public comment, or to
Commissioner comments?
commissioner comments. Yeah, we're already aligned on that. Unless there's a point you wanted to bring up on
No.
old business?
No.
No, okay.
No.
Okay. And I suppose old business discussion closed. We now have opportunity for public comment. Mr. Curtis?
Thank God.
No, I'm all good, thank you.
Consultant and administration comments?
I would just want to commend, I think you guys did the right thing, the right plan tonight. You stuck with the plan, the master plan. The request was a simple request. It was either up or down, and I think you did the right thing.
Thanks, Joe. Mario, consultant comments?
Nope, nothing else at this time?
Okay, excellent. Oxford Township Planning Commission update?
next month, the township is launching a meeting to form the rewrite of our master plan. And that is going to be a major program that we're looking at doing. And stay tuned for more information on that.
All right. The ZBA
No meeting.
and the DDA.
I can speak on their behalf since I was here till 9 o'clock last night at their meeting. They got a lot going on, of course, as they always do, especially this time of year. One of the things you may see, if you've been around the northeast quadrant, is all the sidewalk area tore out behind schools, admin building, the red naps and stuff that just came out. Two things are going on there simultaneously. They were working on a plan to redo the northeast parking lot area from Burdick all the way up to what formerly was the William Dorff Glass property, because from there up to East Street is private. That was just approved by council and awarded to the Birmingham Seal Code. That's something to be done yet this fall. Part of that project was kind of bleeding into the placemaking project there behind NAPS and the school admin building, which is funded by the Consumers Grant Foundation by relocating some of the curbing on the south end from the real estate, Jennifer Realty around, it swoops around, there was an ADA compliance issue, so that curb was removed and moving out in the parking a little bit more to make it better for traveling, foot traffic and stuff. So that is kind of a parking lot project piece that's taking place now, and then it's gonna accommodate the rest of the sidewalk repair, redo. It's gonna have an arch, it's gonna have some concrete benches and stuff, a new ADA ramp there. Hopefully in the next week or so that's completed. At the same time, there's another placemaking sidewalk removal and replacement behind Victoria's and the old party shop down there. It's gonna stop right about there. That's gonna be taking place yet, hopefully this fall. That's not even out to bid yet. Again, funded by in part by the DDA and the T-Mobile grant that they received up there as well. The council pitched in about $12,500 on the northeast parking lot project to get some of the core sampling and some of the other engineering work done. But it's a large project, one right now and one later this fall that's gonna happen up there. Well, all the other fun stuff they do, but I don't get involved in that.
You're stuck with concrete.
Yep, I'm concerned about the compliance with the parking lot and the ADA and the curb.
Good, that's good stuff.
I do some work with the, it's like the economic group.
Economic development?
Economic development group. And one of the things that they're working on doing is they're trying to expand the trolley to try to do a temporary thing with like Clarkson or another city, as a way to try to bring additional business down into our downtown area.
We'll call that the transition now to our commissioner comments. The trolley expansion, I think, as we move to commissioner comments, Michelle.
Yep, so I made the hard decision to resign from the planning commission.
Nope.
Yeah. But just have a lot of things going on and changes and things, and it was just like, it's hard to do, and I've appreciated and enjoyed my time here and everybody here. So thank you for the time and experience and helping, try to help me do some of the motions, and I appreciated like that part of it where, working together and everything. So thank you, Mario, it's great to work with you.
You stay on the
So,
ZBA?
Thank you. I'd probably not know. Well, it doesn't,
'Cause it's
it
never
never meets.
meets.
It never meets, so I
Something I
should,
said.
but it's also, yeah. Thank you. I should, yeah, probably not. Even though it never meets, it's like, if it does, it's
Just
not
don't be a
people.
stranger.
I think, yeah, so, yeah, so
Well,
thank you.
the feeling and the sentiment is reciprocated. That's, I guess, yeah, it's unfortunate, but understand.
I know, and I felt bad too, because I'm like, okay, get one, lose one, like, sorry. Didn't even meet CJ yet. Hi, CJ. Hi, bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other comments?
I will save the bracket.
There's a future business line item on here. I think we acknowledged some of the future business and our focal point on the landscape standards for discussion in our next meeting. Was there any other future business to discuss? Mr. Madore?
Now that Michelle's got the cat out of the bag, one of y'all is gonna be the planning commission representative to the ZBA. Keep that in mind. You can
And
either
it
step
can't be
forward,
me.
you can either step forward or you can step back. But next month, one of you should probably transition and take up, and I don't know about John's position, whether it can be, there's some things in the Planning Zoning Inland Act that who can and cannot represent from the planning commission to the ZBA. It's a narrower group, and not most, like you said, can't be heard.
Okay, understood.
Carrie just reminded me of that.
Right.
That she's our ZBA.
So basically, there's not a whole lot of choices. There's, you got Leslie, you have me.
Leslie's not here. Is
Yeah.
the right time?
Yeah, she's not here, so she might not have a choice.
And it'll tell you guys not to miss the next meeting.
Let's plan to address that or address that.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a thought that in the future, that when people resign, they have to have an appointment in the wings to come in and take the spot.
Let's add that to future business.
You were gonna say that to bring donuts or something.
We're talking.
Got Yates right down the road.
With that being said, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved today,
At
15.
8:12.